Yes, welcome back my friends, and in today's episode we're going to be making battlefield terrain using pie tins. Oh yes, we're going to be making battlefield craters with the humble pie tin. And this is one of those kind of projects that's just so incredibly simple and easy to do. And I'll hold my hands up, this is not my original idea. I did not come up with this. I think I originally saw it on one of those make a share websites where they do tutorials. But when you actually sit down and try and do this, it's incredibly simple. The longest part of this project is just the painting, and if you've got a good painting technique, you will breeze through it. So what sort of inspired this? So I want to get back into terrain making and model making and painting, because it feels like you get 100 projects on the go and you just can't seem to finish any of them. But something like this is simple and it's effective, and if you put a little bit more time and effort into it, you can create some really interesting and really cheap and affordable pieces of terrain. Now, one of the advantages that pie tins have, as you can see, is that these are pretty much just ready to go. All you need to do is crush in the middle. But let's see if we can do something that makes them a bit sturdier and a bit stronger, namely using a cardboard base. So, as you can see, I've just crushed the centre of the tins in to create that crater-like shape, and putting them on the cardboard, I'm just roughly creating some outlines for them. The whole thing with pie tins, if you haven't immediately guessed, is they are incredibly weak. If I just glue these straight onto the cardboard, they aren't going to survive. So what are we going to do to fix that? Well, for gluing them, we're just going to use the humble hot glue gun, but you could use PVA or wood glue or Mod Podge or something like that if you prefer. But hot glue just gives you that instant strong bond. One of the things you can do is push the nib of the hot glue gun into the actual raised cracks on the underside of the crater that you've made, so that when it dries hard, and all of a sudden that soft tin, as you squeeze it, it's squeezing into hardened glue, so it's not going to go anywhere. All of a sudden it becomes a lot more durable and a lot stronger. And there are other ways you could do this. You could mix up some plaster and pour that in there, or just fill it with cardboard and wood glue or PVA and, just scrap, just junk. But the reality is, get them filled with something that's going to firm them up and then glue them onto a cardboard base. Nice and simple. You can do this. This is a very easy tutorial. All it takes is free materials and your time. What's not to love, right? So the cardboard has a raised edge at the moment, so I'm going to go around and bevel it using my craft knife. It's important to protect your thumb. I use this little copper thumb guard that my partner got me a while back. You can find them online. Just search crafting thumb guard, something like that. And the whole thing with working with cardboard as a base material is, yes, you're going to have that corrugation show through, but you can very easily cover that when you get to the basing stage. But just do a bevel around each of the edges, and what I'm going to do now is start to blend the actual tin of the pie tin into the cardboard, as well as fill up the edges. I like to use this cheap flexible filler that dries rock hard. You can use whatever you're comfortable with. Use milliput, use modelling putty, pretty much anything. That's the nice thing about making terrain like this, because battlefields are so blown up and damaged and the earth is so churned over, you can kind of do it however you want, right? There's no right or wrong way of doing this. This is just a material that I'm comfortable with. And the nice thing with this sort of flexible wall filler is that once you've spatulaed it on there and filled a lot of the corrugation of the cardboard, you can then go around with just a tool. In this case, I'm just using a flat piece of cut cardboard. You can actually start cutting grooves into it to replicate the texture that the pie tin provides, because that's the whole thing about pie tins that kind of makes them perfect for this without ever meaning to. Those straight parallel vertical lines that go along the pie tins, when you crush the middle in, it gives that impact feel, like a bomb or something is exploded there, churning the dirt up and scattering it outwards in all directions, right? Like the cardinal points on a star, just a whole spray of lines. And as you can see on this larger 3 crater piece, I've taken that scratching and I've helped sort of blend the pie tins together. Basing and texturing. I'm a massive proponent of just using wood glue and sand because sand is basically free and wood glue is incredibly cheap. But there are other things you can do as well. And one of my personal favourites alongside sand will always be sawdust, and that's what I've got here. The whole thing with sawdust is it is gritty, it is particulate, it's wood chips basically. You get finer pieces, you get larger pieces. It gives you that kind of churned up mulch look that you see on a forest floor. But if you paint it right, it can look like a muddy battlefield, it can look like scorched earth, it can look like there's bits of rubble, bits of building, like material bricks and stone that have been churned up by the impact craters. But in both cases, the materials are flaky, and just one layer of glue isn't going to hold it to the cardboard. A trick that a lot of people use online, and I'm not going to go into here, is using a combination of water, PVA glue, and dish soap mixed together, and then spritzed onto the top of the surface just to stop some of the particulate from falling off. It helps lock in the material onto the base. I've never really sort of considered it myself, but hey, if it works, and it worked here for me, so I recommend it. But you can see these are pretty much these are craters ready to go, aren't they? And it all comes down to adding extra levels of detail. Because you could just quite happily paint these and call it done, right? Even on the smaller one where I did all that work with the filler and then scratched into the cardboard to make the crater more pronounced, put some sand around the edges, you're done. But there are extra steps you can take. The more effort you put into a project, the better it looks. So just cutting some thin strips of cardboard, like cereal box card, you can cut these little tile-looking things, scatter those around the outside of the crater, and sure, even if they don't match the battlefield you're working on, they give the impression that maybe this is part of a city or a structure that has been bombed into oblivion, and that resonates. Another thing I don't see many people do when it comes to making these craters, and again, it's just because it comes down to time, is surrounding the big craters with little impact sites, little smaller craters that would have been created by maybe bits of debris being hurled into the air and coming back down, or smaller submunitions coming out of the larger weapons being used to create the larger craters. So here all I've done is taken a ball of milliput that I've mixed together, splodged it onto the base of this crater, and then using a metal tool, and you can use whatever tool works for you at the end of the day. If a rubber one works better for you, great, use that. But using a metal sculpting tool to just create the suggestion of a smaller crater alongside it. And this is one of those things that if you have lots of projects on the go at the same time and you're working on something that uses modeling putty or milliput on a different project, but you've got a little bit left over, hey, stick it on one of these bases. Because the more little bits of interest that you create, the more impactful the actual finished thing is. It's more detail for the eye to pick up on. It's more texture for you to pull out of the piece as you're painting it. We tend to glaze over when we just see an endless streak of sandy, muddy base, and then just all of a sudden there's a great big crater. You want bits of debris, you want bits of miniatures, you want, like bits of armor or weapons that have been blown apart. The only thing there is, that tends to tie it more to a specific game or genre. So like if you put Space Marine bits on the base, it ties it into Warhammer 40k and to the Horus Heresy. So I'm not going to bore you terribly with how I paint this because painting is different for everyone, but my process for doing these craters was this: a watered down black PVA like poster paint base with a bit of dish soap mixed in just to help it break the surface tension on things like the sand and the sawdust. Just wash that all over. You will note that when it comes to painting the metal of the pie tins, the paint does not want to stick on the metal, and when it does, it tends to leave these raised areas where the base metal colour is shining through. On the black undersided steak pucker pie tins, it doesn't really matter, but on all the cheaper, clear, shiny metal ones, that can be a bit more of an issue. But the more paint you put on this, the less that metal is going to show through as each layer dries. So what I'm doing here is a preliminary sort of dark grey base coat over all of the what would be sort of stone impact sites, right? Painting craters is kind of weird because when you look at sort of reference images online, they don't look anything like the battlefield terrain we typically paint up. Reference images tend to just make them look like dirty brown holes in the ground, which, to be fair, is what they are, because if you launch an artillery shell at a field, it's just going into dirt and it's just going to pull up that deep soil onto the surface. So it's just going to be brown and blackened by the impact, right? But when we paint ours, we tend to have like the sort of concrete substructure underneath the ground of like a city or something, that sort of being ripped upwards. So you just have to paint them how you like to paint your terrain at the end of the day. I mean, I tend to go for a, if it's like a stone structure or something that is in a city or industrial setting, go for a grey base colour. But then when it comes to all the earthy, dirty tones around it, go for a brown, and then dry brush, or in this case overbrush, a sort of ochre brown colour over the top. Dry brushing and overbrushing is your friend with this kind of project, but I cannot stress, if you use cheap paints, you have a longer wait time as it dries. I had a very long wait time between rounds of drying with this project because I had to wait for each different cheapo paint layer. Like this white paint, terrible, absolutely terrible. Bargain basement cheap, but it takes so long to dry and it's so light and feathery, if that makes sense. Like you can see here, I've made like a light grey, but it just vanishes as I dry brush it on. Before you wash it, I would recommend doing a sealant coat. This is just to protect the paint that you've done so far, because ultimately a water-based wash over a water-based paint is going to reactivate the paint and just slosh it off. It's just going to slough off all of the detail you've done. And you will see that as we go through this. You'll see when it gets to the actual base of the metal pie craters, because that base metal starts to shine through, and it can only do that if the paint's been reactivated. So this is just a standard black wash, just cheap black poster paint and water and dish soap, and that's it. Just mix it up. There are 101 different recipes and tutorials online. Just pick one of those, make it, and slop it all on. I tend to avoid the actual brown ochre dirt areas, like the surrounding outskirts. You don't have to base the entire thing in this black wash. Just prioritize the craters. And again, this wash is going to take what feels like an eternity to dry, as you can see, these metal pie tin craters, but just give it time. But there's more we can do. I've mixed up a beige colour, which makes, for some reason in this lighting, makes everything look yellow, but it's not. But it's just that ochre paint with some white, and there you go. It's a light beige. Dry brush that over the brown, you're done. And that can be drying alongside the wash that hasn't finished drying in the crater itself. But finally we get to the point where it's finishing touches. Now let's actually get some of the good paints out. If you have a higher quality white paint, you could just use that. You don't have to use miniature paints. My white paint's trash, that's why I'm using a GW white paint, which isn't the best, but it's what I've got and it's better than that. And you just make a light grey, very light grey, not white. I don't dry brush anything white in this video, as light as it may look, just because we're not trying to make snow like a Valhallan ice world or a Fenrisian crater. We're trying to make just standard craters, right? So dry brush them grey. I mean, look at these. They're basically done, aren't they? The wash has helped pick out all the detail that the actual pie tins have created from being crumpled up and deformed, as well as all the extra little smaller craters we modelled with Milliput. These are pretty much finished. But what extra little touches could we add? Well, all the craters have impact scoring, don't they? They have the dark sort of blackened areas where the actual explosions happened. Now you go around the rim, go around the inside and the outside of the crater, but when it comes to the actual like impact lines, because I feel like that's something people miss when painting these, actually paint out some dark shadows in the recessed areas coming out, but leave the higher sort of ridges of the crater's circumference, if you like, leave those shining. As you can see here, you create that star-like effect. That gives it the effect that it's an explosion. This isn't a natural formation. This is something that has exploded and scattered out. Ash and soot and vaporized filth has been spread out in an area. I put little bits of mangled sprue in this, paint those silver, put a wash on them. I also put these little tufts of static grass on there. Again, these are, next to craters, so they're going to be scorched by it. So just take some black paint and go over the top of that. It's all about the detail, and you can add more details to these very simply and very cheaply and very effectively by just adding different textures and materials, but just keep tying it together with black dry brushing or washes or you name it. And before you know it, that's it. They're done. That's a weekend build and paint job if ever I saw one. So go on, I hope this video has inspired you to make your own. It's been a long time since I made one of these tutorials, so bear with me, I'm getting back into the swing of things. But let me know what you think down in the comments down below. Craters are not the most outrageously exciting thing in the world, but they are a feature of many a battlefield, and I feel are a bit left out in some of our modern games because they're easy to forget about. And the nice thing is as well, these can be used in all different war games. We're not just talking sci-fi futuristic 40k, you can use them in your historicals, you can use them in Turnip28, you can use them in your trench crusade. Any battlefield that uses artillery creates craters. And unless you specifically model things like an abundance of skulls or space marines blown apart on the bases, you can make these once and use them in everything, which is what I plan on doing. And it doesn't get much cheaper than free, and if you've ever eaten a pie in your life, you've got a pie tin, save it, wash it, use it to make some craters. Alright, thank you all for watching, my friends, and I will see you in the next episode. Thank you, and